Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3.
Hi, I'm Dan Watanabe.
And I'm Sara Anne Raps, known as Saran.
We are here as part of a weekly podcast that's going to be talking about Hollywood, movies, television shows, and everything you want to know about the wonderful world of show business.
So welcome to Dan and Saran Take on Hollywood.
Every week, we will pick a movie that you probably should have seen, and we will go over it and talk about things you might not have known about it.
The inside scoop.
Tonight's movie is going to be one that has a lot of controversy associated with it. It was one of the all-time box office champions, and in fact, adjusted for inflation, it still remains the #1 box office attraction. Yet, for many moderns, it has a certain element of controversy to it. The movie, of course, is Gone with the Wind. Made in 1939, considered by many to be Hollywood's best year because not only was Gone with the Wind made, but also Wizard of Oz, Stagecoach, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Ninotchka.
Yes.
So it was a very good year.
It was a golden year for Hollywood.
So Saran, if you would start out by just telling us a little bit about who you are and where you came from.
I'm a native of southern New England, and I was born into a family that loved show business, theater, movies, drama, the ballet, music. And so I saw this film after I read the book when I was an impressionable high school student. And it made such an impression upon me that I saw it again 7 years later when it was re-released. I'm a former feature film development executive. I worked for a producer at 20th Century Fox. We turned scripts into movies. We published books. And I did that for a number of companies. And now what I do is I work privately with clients as a story editor, advocating for the material. And I also work with Dan Watanabe in the Ideas program out of LA Valley College, where we expose students to opportunities in the business of all kinds, digital media above the line and below the line.
My past is a little bit more unusual, I would say. I was born in Washington, D.C. My parents were Department of Defense, actually CIA. They can say that now because they retired overt. And my dad was transferred to Japan when I was 12 years old. So I finished my high school in Japan as a Japanese American who could not speak Japanese. So it was, shall we say, a very interesting experience. My career in Hollywood was as a development exec at a company now known as Fremantle Media. At the time I was there, I made it through 3 name changes: Scotty Brothers Pictures, All American Communications, and Pearson Television. Then it became Fremantle. The shows I worked on included Family Feud, Price is Right, a number of first-run syndication shows, and
wait for it,
Baywatch. And over the course of this show, we will tell you a lot of secrets about Baywatch.
It wasn't all about the jiggle.
That's right. Gone with the Wind for me served as a seminal film in my life and a seminal book. I first read it when I was in 5th grade, and it made a tremendous impression on me. And telling you that as a fat Asian kid growing up in DC, having role models like Scarlett O'Hara helped me get through some of those difficult times that we all have in adolescence.
And as an adolescent girl, I was in love with love. And I loved the love story of Rhett Butler and Vivian Leigh because I saw that love was complicated and things didn't always work out the way you wanted them to work out. I had no interest in Ashley. It was Rhett Butler. I loved the bad boys even back then.
For me, Scarlett O'Hara was the perfect heroine. In fact, I still, when I teach screenwriting, use Scarlett O'Hara as the ultimate model for an ideal main character. Because here is someone that if you took just her actions and removed them from her motivations, you wouldn't believe her. She does one heroic and amazing thing after another. She helps a woman give birth without having any training in it. She works as a nurse in a hospital. She has a town fall down around her. She helps this woman give birth. She then escapes from a city that is under siege. She returns to her hometown only to discover that her house has been ravaged. Her mother is dead. Her father has gone insane, and everyone is turning to her and expecting her to help them survive. And you know what? She does.
And she's like an example of the utilitarian hero because she uses what's on hand. I mean, Carol Burnett took that to comedic heights when she did the takeoff on Gone with the Wind called Went with the Wind, where she takes the velvet curtains and turns them into a dress but doesn't take out the rod. Well, in the movie, that's what she does because she wants to be presentable and beautiful for Rhett because she needs to borrow money from him. And so she uses whatever is around her to achieve her goals. She marries two men she doesn't love because for one, she needs the money, and the other, she's taking revenge on Melanie and Ashley. Correct?
That's correct.
Yep. So she's a utilitarian. She's absolutely someone who, she's actually pretty practical. When you first meet her, she seems like a bit of a flippity gibbet, but actually she knows how to use what's around her to achieve her aims.
One of the controversies that Gone with the Wind has always had is that people look at Scarlett as being unlikable because she's in love with another man's, with another woman's husband. But when you think about it, Ashley actually makes more sense for Scarlett than Rhett does. In fact, in real life, the author of the book, Margaret Mitchell, married the character that was the inspiration of Ashley, John Marsh, after she divorced the guy who was the inspiration for Rhett Butler. So when you read the book, you have that sense that Scarlett might seem wrong to be going after Ashley, but actually, psychologically speaking, for a strong woman to pair herself with a more weak but nurturing guy is a good match.
Yes, with Rhett, it was more of a clash of wills. You know, who was going to give in to who, and most of their marriage was fighting, was confrontation, and their wills were always clashing. But she could have had her way with Ashley, but in the end, her not having Ashley actually served her. It kind of toughened her up, didn't it?
Yes,
she didn't get what she wanted. She didn't get. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the behind the scenes stuff. Starting off with, there was 500,000 feet of film shot, and they edited it down to 20,000. And what I'd like to know is what was on the cutting room floor. I think I would have loved to have sat through a couple of weeks of 500,000 feet of film just to see what they left out.
Well, here's the thing, is that it's probably good that we don't have all of that film, because then somebody might decide, let's do a restored version and put all that footage back in.
Yeah. And
then they would take a movie that's already long, already has certain scenes that might have some slow pacing issues, and make it into something unbearable. I know that this is going to make some of the other teachers upset, but I'm of the belief that a lot of these restored versions of classical movies have actually removed future audiences from even liking them.
In other words, there's a reason why things are on the cutting room floor.
Absolutely.
And it's almost an insult to the editors who work so hard to pick out the right footage for the director's vision. And this idea of restoring, it's saying, well, everything's equal and we have to put back what was left out. Maybe not. Decisions were made for a reason.
Absolutely. For example, one of the things that I did in between the time I became a teacher and the time I left Fremantle Media was I worked for a market research company. And the number one thing that we learned was the thing that stopped people from definitely recommending a movie to their friends or their relatives or whoever is slow pacing. It moves too slow. That was the number one charge. And let's look at a movie like Lawrence of Arabia, which when I first saw it, it was the shorter roadshow version. And I loved it. And a few years after that, they did the first restoration where they added back scenes. They added in sequences where they had new actors filling in voices. Same with Spartacus. And now all of a sudden, the movie that was paced rather slowly, methodically, now became boring.
What happens is when you're watching a movie and the pace is too slow, you are taken out of the movie. You're looking at the exit sign, you're looking at your watch, you're looking at the people in front of you. Whereas when you're fully engaged, when you're watching a film, you lose track of all those things. You don't know what's going on around you and you don't care. But the minute something is too slow, you're distracted.
Absolutely. Take, for example, the 1954 version of A Star is Born, the Judy Garland movie, that for years, and even today, you still have a lot of complaints that Warner Brothers took half an hour out of it. But and again,
Let me just ask you, the conventional story is they took it out because they would make less money, because there would be fewer showings, because the film would be so long. Do you believe that that's true?
I believe that that's part of the truth.
Mm.
That's the part of the truth that film historians like to believe.
Yeah.
The other part of the truth is that the movie wasn't working. The movie was too long. And there's always the story of George Cukor going back to Warner Brothers and saying, look, I'll go in and I'll recut the film and we can take a half an hour out of it, but we'll have to do this. The reality was that's not practical. The movie was already in release. That would have meant that they would have to have gone back to the negative, reconformed the negative. They would have had to have remixed all of the sound. It would have absolutely pulled the movie out of theaters at the height of its initial exposure, probably let people know that this was a problematic film, as opposed to just cutting the half hour out in a way where actually the theaters themselves could make the cuts.
I'm not fully understanding. Are you saying that he wanted to make cuts after the film was released?
After the film was released and it was clear that it was too long, Warner Brothers was saying, we're going to have to cut this.
But didn't they cut half an hour before it was released?
No, did
they pull it out of distribution?
No, what they did is they actually sent instructions to the theaters on what to cut out.
And so the
theaters cut that, and some of the prints went back and they put in a couple of new dissolves, but by and large, it was ways of just making a few trims here and there and shortening the film.
Now, when you look at the TCM shows the restored, and they lost the actual footage, so they have still photographs and you can hear the dialogue. It's interesting only if you were a student of film.
Not even then, because what that does is it throws the only people that the longer version of A Star Is Born, I feel, will find it interesting as a movie now are people who saw it originally in its 154-minute, which is already long.
Well, I didn't see it. I saw it on television for the first time, and I'm one of those people because I'm a little bit of a film historian, and I like to see anything that was left on the cutting room floor. It's always very interesting to me to see the choices that were made, and because I do love the film so much, I just love seeing the what they threw back in. But I understand what you're saying. For purposes of actually the purest element of watching a film, you're absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Yes, and well, thank you. But also, one of the things about A Star Is Born, if you look at what was cut, there's two numbers in particular that were the source of the controversy. One of them was Lose That Long Face, which is a production number.
Right.
The loss of that was a mistake because you have this very bright and happy production number followed by a very, very tearful scene between Judy Garland and Charles Bickford talking about the husband.
That scene in the dressing room where she gets hysterical because she can't help him get sober.
Yes.
That's a wonderful scene.
And then it's followed by her going back out and finishing this happy song.
That would have been a great contrast.
The other scene is Here's What I'm Here For, where he proposes to her. And it's a fun scene because they're recording the song and during the break, the audio technicians move the microphone over it and actually capture them doing the proposal. And then they play it back. But the scene is pokey. And it's coming at a point of the movie where there's a lot of scenes that are bread and butter scenes. So it slowed it down.
It was kind of adorable because it is in the restored, but it feels like a device. It feels like a device. Oh, isn't this cute? He's proposed to her. We play a little trick on them. Well, let's get back to, we love film so much that we could talk about so many other films for hours. And I think maybe let's get back to Gone with the Wind. Let's talk about some of the behind the scenes drama that was going on. That Vivien Leigh who was married, was involved with Laurence Olivier, who was married. They had children, they left their families for each other. They had this grand passion. And the story is that she wanted to get back to England, both of them, because it was during the Blitz. Actually, if the film was made in 38, wasn't it? It
was made from pretty much most of 1939. I think Vivien Leigh was officially cast in January of 39.
Well, I'm going to have to take, say that I don't know about the Blitz story because the war broke out September 1st, 1939. So by then the film was shot. The conventional story, the one we hear, is that she would always ask to work longer to make extra scenes to either get home to him or get back to him in England. You know, either he was here and she just wanted to be with him, or he was back there. You know, and so they didn't have rules back then about how long people could work. They worked on Saturdays. They had 6-day weeks on the studio, which they don't have today. And they didn't have the rules about turnaround time where actors have to have a certain amount of rest. I mean, they worked the heck out of these actors.
They did. And that's one of the reasons why the film created, that's why one of the reasons why the film was such a challenge.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing about Gone with the Wind is to see how the marketing department was involved, because they were involved from the very beginning. They knew this was going to be a monumental film. And one of the greatest things that the marketing department came up with was the search for Scarlett O'Hara.
And the interesting thing is the accepted story is that when they filmed the first scene, which was the burning of the Atlanta Depot with stunt people playing Gable and Vivian Leigh, they're riding that buckboard through the flames, that Myron Selznick, who was a big agent, brought David Selznick, Vivian Leigh, and said, "This is your Scarlett." The truth is that they had seen her before. She was being considered. Isn't that correct?
She had been considered all the way back from about 1937 or 1938, when Selznick had seen Fire Over England.
Yes.
And he was a little concerned because of her accent, but he was more concerned that this quintessentially American film, just based on who they were thinking they were going to cast at that point, was problematic, because there were no Southerners in the leads. You had Clark Gable, who was a Yankee. You had Olivia de Havilland, who was British. You had Leslie Howard, who was British.
Right.
And they felt that to have the lead in this Big Plum movie go to another Brit was going to cause a revolution.
So what they did was they had this huge campaign, and they auditioned every single young actress in Hollywood, from Lucille Ball to Paulette Goddard to Tallulah Bankhead. If you know about Tallulah Bankhead, that's really a stretch, kind of, but she was Southern. She's from Alabama. And then they actually even sent casting people to the South, and they also auditioned local girls.
Very much so.
And in the end, he took the chance to cast her, to cast Vivian Leigh.
And the fire at the depot where they burned old sets from Garden of Allah and King Kong was the setting for it. And it was it's amazing to me that so many people will still quote that today as if it was the truth, when just on the surface of it, it's so patently obvious that it was a publicity stunt.
It's a myth. And what is true is that while Margaret Mitchell didn't have Clark Gable in mind when she wrote Red Butler,
she actually had
her first husband.
It was not only that, but in terms of actors, by the time the book was published, the person that she had as her ideal was Ronald Colman.
Interesting. But the public loved Gable so much. And one wants to know, where'd that start? Somebody must have dropped that in somewhere, because they clamored for Gable. There was no need. But they did consider other actors. Selznick did consider other actors. Ronald Colman among them.
The big casting thing that surprised everyone was the obvious choice for Scarlett O'Hara for many of the people at that era was Bette Davis. But Bette Davis at that time
made Jezebel.
No, Jezebel was made as a consolation for her not getting Gone with the Wind. And it was one of those movies that, because they knew Gone with the Wind was going to be big, you know how today when you see a movie that's made to capitalize on the publicity for another, that's exactly what Jezebel was. But they offered a combination of Errol Flynn and Bette Davis to Selznick. But Selznick didn't like the terms of the deal. And by that time, the public was so obsessed with Clark Gable as that role that there was no choice. They really had to put him in it.
It was inevitable.
And no, Margaret Mitchell had no idea of Clark Gable, because when she started writing the book, he was still
he was yet to be the king.
He was still, well, basically doing stuff that would cause other scandals later.
Yes.
And maybe we'll talk about that too.
Another time we will deal with all the gossip. There's so much of it.
But he was still not even an actor at that stage, or if he was, he was just starting out.
What do you you think is the movie that made Gable the king?
The movie that made him the king, of course, is It Happened One Night.
Yes.
And
That was 32.
that was 34.
34, yes.
And
And that was the movie that nobody thought, it was just a little, almost like a throwaway.
at that time, both Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert were being punished by their respective studios. Clark Gable was being punished because he was having an affair with Joan Crawford and he refused to cool it. And both he and Crawford were married to other people at that time. But they were going really hot and heavy, and Mayer decided that Gable was getting a little bit too big for his britches.
And from what I've read, they remained lovers on and off throughout his life.
Pretty much until he died.
Yeah, yeah.
And in Claudette Colbert's case, she had been very, very difficult for Paramount because she felt betrayed during a scene in the movie in 32, Sign of the Cross.
Yeah, the scene where her breast was
her
invisible.
breast got was revealed in the scene where she's bathing in ass milk in Sign of the Cross, and she had been sworn that would not happen, and sure enough, there it is on camera.
And you know what's so interesting, because and Dan and I have talked about this, is that it's a miracle any movie gets made. Number one, it's a miracle any movie gets made and it's good, and it's a miracle that any movie gets made and it becomes a classic, like Gone with the Wind. Production was hectic. Cukor was fired. There were,
George Cukor was the original director.
He was the original, and after 3 weeks, he was fired. And there are a lot of myths why he was fired. I think that one of them that I've read several places is that Selznick felt the pacing was too slow.
Well, there were two people who were fired very early in the production. One of them was the initial cinematographer, Lee Garms, and the other was Cukor. And the reason that Lee Garms was fired was that his look was too subtle. His coloring was too subtle. And Selznick, because this was a Technicolor movie and it was the early days of Technicolor, he was wanting something that looked more garish. And as far as Cukor being fired, the accepted wisdom is that he was taken off the film because Gable did not like him.
Yeah.
But there was another reason why Gable didn't like him. And now this is Hollywood rumor on the other side.
Gable had a past, and he was afraid Cukor was going to spill the beans.
And the Gable's past, and we might as well go into it because it is published in many outside sources of varying degrees of repute. But the story is that in the 1920s, in the late 20s, when Gable was starting his career and he was married to Josephine Hutchinson, who was almost 30 years older than him, that she was basically pimping him out. And in order to get him a career going, because she knew he was a pretty boy and he would be attractive.
And he was very well liked by gay men.
And one of the people that he apparently tricked with was Billy Haynes, who was a big silent star who didn't make the transition to sound, but later on became the decorator to the stars.
And Gable knew that Cukor knew about his past, and he was very uncomfortable.
Well, Billy Haynes and Cukor were very good friends, and they would have their Saturday afternoon soirees where they would have young boys actors
the
come in.
seamy side of Hollywood. Ladies and gentlemen, it's always been there. Well, you mentioned the Technicolor thing, because here's a statistic. There were only 7 Technicolor cameras in existence at the time. And for the burning of the Atlanta Depot, which was the first scene shot, they used all 7 of them. And it took 15,000 gallons of water to put out that huge fire. And today, during a drought, that would be an absolute publicity disaster.
Well, at the time, it was a publicity disaster because even though they thought they told everyone that there would be this big fire that was going on and that would be controlled.
People who lived in Culver City thought that there was a real fire.
Absolutely.
And called the fire. And of course, the fire department was probably on scene already as a precaution. You know, there are so many interesting factoids that we know about this film, and we would love to tell you. How are we doing for time? We're doing well, I can just let you know that the woman who played Scarlett O'Hara's mother was only 3 years older than Barbara O'Neill.
And her name is spelled wrong on the credits.
Yes, and when you look at her, you say, yes, she looks like her mother. She's only 3 years older. It's like Angela Lansbury playing Lawrence Harvey's mother, and I think they were just like 3 or 4 years.
I think they were the same age.
Or they were the same age. Some people just can look old. And then the original poster, it said presenting Vivien Leigh. It had Gable and Olivia de Havilland and Leslie Howard had said presenting Vivien Leigh. But after she won the Oscar, they changed that to having her be the star. And during the birth scene, during Melanie's birth scene, the director sat off camera and pinched Olivia de Havilland's toes to make her squeal with pain.
Actually, what he was doing is he was twisting her ankle.
Twisting her. Oh my goodness! So what I read? Oh, that's even worse. That's real acting, ladies and gentlemen. And what else?
The other thing that happened during the production of the film is that it was a perfect encapsulation of how sometimes chaos can create a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
The truth about Gone with the Wind is that the original screenplay was written by Sidney Howard, who was a very strong playwright. And after he wrote one or two drafts, he went back to his farm on the East Coast and was run over by a tractor. And ever since then, Selznick would practically be writing the script himself. The script had multiple writers on it.
But in the end, he locked Ben Hecht in a room for how long? A week? Something like that?
2 weeks.
2 weeks so that they could hammer out a final script.
They hammered out a final script, and it was Ben Hecht really is the person who wrote most of Gone with the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
Although there were little side moments when writers as illustrious as F. Scott Fitzgerald tried their hand at it.
And Fitzgerald had an interesting note. He said that there was excessive dialogue, and he wanted the characters' actions to speak for themselves. And there are several scenes where they paid attention to his notes, but they wanted him to be a comedy writer and write more funny lines for Aunt Pity Pat, and he was fired because he couldn't come up with them. So one of our great American novelists was fired because he couldn't write enough jokes, which is kind of ironic.
It is sad, but it also is very true of Hollywood, that
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood at that time was known as the cemetery of literary talent.
Mm-hmm.
That because writing a screenplay is very, very different from writing anything else. And
it looks easy, but it is the most difficult of all the genres of writing, in my experience, in my opinion.
Well, for example, when you're in school, all the way through the time you decide to become a screenwriter,
Mm-hmm.
every time you're in a writing class, the word is key. Whether you're writing a play, whether you're writing an essay, whether you're writing something that's extemporaneous or funny, it's always the word is of primacy. But in a screenplay, the word is but a blueprint, and the word cannot be descriptive or flowery the way it can be in a book.
Well, the essence of screenwriting, and I often say this to aspiring screenwriters, is what you leave out, is what is left out, because you're always advised to take a look at the sides of dialogue you write and cut what you can and leave it to the actors and leave it to action and leave it, because it is a visual medium. So a novelist like Fitzgerald might think, and a lot of people, I'm not saying that, I don't know what he thought, but a lot of people look at a script and say, I can do that. There isn't that much on the page. And it is the essence of what's indicated.
Well, that's what makes it so difficult,
Mm-hmm.
especially nowadays, because a lot of teaching of screenwriting removes some of the stuff that was in there in the past, for reasons that are not taught today.
What do you mean?
Well, it's simple things. For example, when you look at an old screenplay, they will write in camera angles. And that was because a lot of these were special shots. And so they would require special equipment. So it became a budget item.
And you're not talking about shooting scripts, you're talking about a script?
I'm talking about from the time they would write the original script,
right.
that you would write in certain shots just to make sure that they were actually
And today
taken.
that is a no-no.
It's a total no-no.
Yeah.
The other thing that has disappeared from screenplays is transitions, such as cut twos,
Right.
such as dissolves, and such as fades. And on the one hand, that makes sense because in the past, that was another budget item. To do a dissolve cost a lot of money because you have to get 2 pieces of film, you'd have to put them in an optical printer and all that. And you would actually have a number of dissolves you could use, a number of straight cuts you could use, a number of fades you could use. But what's happened is by taking those cut twos and fades and dissolves out, now your script page count has gone down by quite a lot.
So a script that was made in the 40s, for instance, I mean, how many just a normal length, an hour and a half, how many pages would it have been?
It would have been the same number of pages, and that's where you came up with the whole idea that
Of a minute a page.
About a minute a page. So it made sense on a practical level. But now that those things have been removed, now that you don't have the camera angles in, that 1 minute a page is not quite as easy to calculate as it used to be.
And my take on all of this is, and I'll reiterate what I said. I do believe that so many people who can't write screenplays, who don't have the ability, the talent, because it is a craft, they look at it what it is because of a book fills the page with words, and you have a lot more freedom. You can talk about what characters are thinking. You can do so many things, but there's a very strict discipline to screenwriting. And you and I have talked about this. You said out of limitation comes great creativity. You know, when you have time limits, when you have limits, the limits that screenwriting puts on a writer are tremendous, and that can spark great creativity. And or you can be like Proust. And I'm not here to diss Proust, but then you can write a 1,000-page novel where you're talking about every sense memory you ever had. You know, where's the discipline there?
Well, the other thing that's changed over time is the way dialogue is used. If you look at something like Gone with the Wind, it's still very tied to a somewhat theatrical background. They had already figured out by 1939 that it was reactions, not what was being said, that was what was important and where the audience got a lot of its meaning. But just look at how long some of the sides of dialogue are. For example, there's the scene where Rhett is taking Scarlett out of Atlanta right before he abandons her for the first time, and he gives this long thing, this long speech about how he's going to go off to the war. Scarlett, look at me. I love you more than I've ever loved any woman. And I've waited for you longer than I've ever waited for any woman. Here's a soldier of the South who wants to feel your arms around him, who wants to carry the memory of your kisses into battle with him. Never mind about loving me. You're a woman sending his soldier to his death with a beautiful memory. Kiss me, Scarlett. Kiss me once. That is a huge side of dialogue that would not be allowed at all
Absolutely.
today.
Now, you'd have 3 sentences at the most. He'd say, I love you. I've got to do this. Kiss me.
Yes.
That's it.
But here's what's interesting about Gone with the Wind also is that it's often criticized as being very anti-female. And yet I feel that it's one of the key pre-feminist works, because if you look at Scarlett in it, what the movie is really about is not about Scarlett being punished for not appreciating Rhett for who he is. What the movie does, and here's where the movie actually has a genius beyond the book, is that it's about the battle of personalities between a male and a female, and she wins. Because during the course of the movie, Rhett presents himself as a traditional hero. I am someone that you can rely on. I am the guy who doesn't care. I'm a social iconoclast. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, I understand. And I think that feminists are all too quick to jump on something where a woman is involved in loving a man. But when you take a look at Scarlett O'Hara, she's got a huge masculine side. I mean, her masculine side is becomes so well developed because she does what men did. She hides the body of a dead Yankee soldier. She goes out in the field. She does whatever she can to keep Tara going. She marries men she doesn't love for ulterior motives to get what she wants and what she needs for her family. She delivers a baby when she has no idea what she's doing. And she rises to the occasion, and she is dirty and gritty. And in the end, I think that what is misunderstood, and we've talked about this, about how she's the hero of this, not Rhett Butler. I want to hear from you, your take on Rhett Butler being kind of a coward. You know, and this is very, very, goes against the grain of conventional thinking about his character.
Well, at the end, when Rhett says, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, you get the feeling that he's had it with Scarlett and she's now getting her comeuppance. But actually, it's Rhett who's confessing that he can't stand up to her, that she is a stronger figure than him. And what's more is that we realize that he's never really shown himself to be a man. When he leaves Scarlett on the road to Tara after the fire in Atlanta, why does he leave? It makes no sense to go and join the army when there's a woman and another woman has just had a baby, and they're going to have to go through a hostile army. Why would you leave?
And then he takes their child and goes to England.
Oh yes, right after
right
after he proves that he's a guy, and he has that night of bliss with her after they're married.
Right.
And then in the next morning, when
she's all happy, and he's like, shining her on.
he runs away again.
He runs away again. Yeah, absolutely. And so let me ask you, that scene where he says, I'm going to go, does that kind of ring not so true? I mean, it's almost like his back is against the wall, because he has refused. He's kind of played both ends against the middle, because he's a blockade runner, right? And so he doesn't enlist. He doesn't put his life at stake. He's unwilling to. And then in that moment when he puts his life at stake, what do you think about that? Does that ring true for you?
No, but that's why it works.
Yeah.
Because, and that's why it was a key scene in 1939, because it was so unexpected, and yet it was real to who Rhett really is, that he's willing to do things for show, but when push comes to shove,
he's gone.
He's gone.
He's a runner.
When the going gets tough, he gets gone.
And so that scene that so many women and feminists, they call it a rape scene. It wasn't a rape scene. They were married. She was refusing to sleep with him. He was a little drunk. She was a little drunk. She fights him a little bit, but we know that she really could have fought him a little bit more, and that he had his way with her, and she loved it. She absolutely just loved it. And so I think that he's a man who didn't know how to be happy, because if he had turned to her and said, now we're going to make, of course we wouldn't have a film, but if he had been a real man and said, okay, now we're going to make a life together, and I'm going to be here, I'm going to stay with you, and we're going to make our marriage work. Of course, things wouldn't have been, we wouldn't have had a movie. And I just am so interested, because Dan, when we talk about film, I love to hear your take on things, because it makes me think. I don't always agree with you, but I've often said we meet in the middle. And so you've shown me a side of Rhett Butler that now when I watch the movie, I will not have the same attitude or the same reactions to it. That she really, really is the man in this film. She really is. He does some manly things. Yes, he does. When he's pushed against the wall, he will show up, but then he disappears.
Yes.
And the thing about being a grown-up, being a man, is that you have to be consistent,
Well, think about one of the things is that most characters at some point in a movie or a TV show will give their thesis statement. And all throughout the movie, Rhett is making fun of Ashley for being caught up in romance and caught up in the Old South and all of that. And then what is Rhett's line right before, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn? He turns to Scarlett and says, she goes, where would you go? And he goes, I'm going back to Charleston, back to a life of charm and grace. How Ashley Wilkes is that?
Absolutely. And Ashley, in a way, was more of a man than he was, because he enlisted and went off to war.
Ashley knows who he is.
He knows who he is, and he's faithful to his wife. I mean, and at one point he does confess his love for Scarlett, but he's a realist. She's lived in fantasy all this time about Ashley. He's been the realist, and he has said to her a thing no woman wants to hear. I love you, but I need to be with my wife. And that love is not a real strong love. It's not a love where you can build a life together.
It's mere carnality.
Yes.
On his part. And if you read some of the new queer theorists on Gone with the Wind, they position that Ashley and Melanie are actually a Twilight Tandem couple. And yes,
what does that mean?
That means that you have a gay man marrying either a neuter or a lesbian woman and having a kid just to keep up appearances, but really they live in their books. They live in their similarities, not in the kind of erotic passion that drives traditional heterosexual marriage.
Well, what's so interesting is they spend so little time together. They spent, the fact that it's shocking almost that she was able to get pregnant, because they don't really have a life together. he goes off to war. He comes back for a while. He leaves again, and she has the baby, and then she dies.
Yes.
And then she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about Melanie, let's talk about Melanie's character, because only Olivia de Havilland could have played that and not made it icky, because she's a goody two shoes. She could have been a goody two shoes, but she's such an awesome person. She's such a good person. She loves Scarlett. She forgives Scarlett everything. She's the one, I think, who sees, now that her father's dead, because her father saw her as the son he never had. And we get that from the get-go. And that's why the idea that real estate is everything, this thesis that you have often proposed. The thing about Melanie is that she's almost, she's the opposite of Rhett. She sees Scarlett as a heroine. And she never ever, and she dies without ever saying a mean or nasty word about her. But she's also very, very, very wise, that when Clark Gable, when Rhett does not want to bury Bonnie, that's really heartbreaking, because he doesn't want his beloved daughter to be in the dark. I mean, as a mother, that just chokes me up. It is Melanie that persuades him to let Bonnie Blue go.
Yes.
And so that's a very, very powerful moment. And that shows Melanie's got a strength that she never has to find.
Mm-hmm.
Scarlett has to find that strength. She has to find it. And in the end, you think, well, tomorrow's another day and I'll get him back. No, tomorrow's another day where I'm going to make my way through this world on my own steam. And yeah, maybe I'll get him back. But that's her ego speaking. That's just her ego. Do you think she really wants Rhett back?
Oh no, she's got Tara. She's got the house in Atlanta. She's got it all. She's got real estate. She can buy what she wants. She can go down to New Orleans, find some cute guy, and call it a day.
Absolutely. So maybe she's one of those people whose ego is so easily bruised, and she wants her way, that maybe she'll never be able to make like a peaceful, happy marriage with someone, but she will always get what she wants.
One of the uncomfortable things about Gone with the Wind for a lot of young viewers today, or people today, is its depiction of the Black characters, and in particular Prissy and Mammy, who are looked at as being very, very negative stereotypes.
Well, the NAACP went to Selznick, and he took out any Ku Klux Klan activity. It took out those scenes, and they didn't say the N word, which was very prevalent, obviously, back then.
Where are the other servants, Mammy? Not where are the other slaves?
Yes, that's true.
And it was, if you look at other movies of the 30s, and you can only judge a movie based on the others around it at that time, I feel, and as a person of color, I'm going to say that I have no problem with Charlie Chan for the same reason, that given the environment of the 1930s,
right,
Mammy is the character who is both practical,
right,
she's wise, she knows exactly what Scarlett's about, but yet she will stick up for her. Scarlett is more afraid of Mammy than she is of her own mother.
And in real life, when the film premiered in Atlanta in December of '39, none of the Black actors were invited, and Gable was furious, and he wasn't going to go. But Hattie McDaniel, who played Mammy, talked him into going, saying that he had to do it for the sake of the film and that she would be okay. And when they were at the Oscars, the Black actors could not sit with the white actors. And if you remember, when she gets up there and she won for Best Supporting Actress, she gets up there and says she always hopes that she's going to be a credit to her race. And you can, a lot of people today can cast aspersions upon her for saying that, but that was the thinking of the time. We have to remember that there's always context.
Was it she or Louise Beavers who said, I would rather make $700 a week playing a maid
than $7 a week being a maid? I looked that up, and it was her, because she got a lot of criticism for the Black community. But and there was a huge Black film industry. That's where Lena Horne got her start, but that was made for Black audiences. It was segregated, not only in the making of it, but in distribution, as music was, until rock and roll burst upon the scene in the mid-50s. There was Black music for the Black audience, and there was the white music, and then everything got thrown together. And for us today, back in the 60s, Petula Clark kissed Harry Belafonte in the mid-60s on a show, remember?
Yes.
And there was a huge controversy about that she touched not only touched a black man, but kissed him on the cheek or something because he was a guest on her show.
Same
So
with Star Trek with Kirk's kiss with Uhura.
yes, yes, and now if you look what's happening in the South with black mayors and black sheriffs and lots of intermarriage, it's no big deal now. And so we've come a long, long way. But to anybody listening to this who wants to look at films back then through the lens of today, you can't. It's like saying George Washington had slaves, he was a racist, and casting aspersions on him. It's kind of pointless. It's kind of whiny and pointless to me because you have to look at these things in context.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about what your feeling is on how Gone with the Wind is relevant to people who want to get into the industry today?
It's possible to make a great film. You just never know what's going to happen. You know, when you're in it, you have no idea what's going on. Even when you're looking at dailies, I was inspired to go into show business because of films like Gone with the Wind. It's the dream factory. When we go to the movies, we sit in the dark, we dream in the dark with strangers. And a film like Gone with the Wind that tells an epic story with compelling characters should inspire anyone who wants to either be behind the camera, carrying equipment, writing, acting. That the fact that Selznick, the perfectionist, and the big memo writer and the big pain in the neck to everybody, was able to carry this off. So he had a vision. So if you have a vision for yourself, go for it. And I always say, start as a production assistant and be on the set of a movie. And who knows, you might be part of something great like Gone with the Wind.
In terms of what Gone with the Wind inspired in you, when you were a development exec and you were working on things like Quest for Fire and My Favorite Year, how did your love of older movies tie into that?
Well, working as a development person then and now with clients, somebody gives me 4 sentences of an idea I'm already seeing scenes. And there's something, I don't want to say it's in our DNA, but there's something in my system that carries all these old stories, these movies. And so I think that every movie informs every other movie. Every writer that sits down to write a screenplay, it's not necessarily stealing, but it's being informed by the past, by what we've all seen. You know, especially the great movies and the ones we see over and over again, it becomes part of us. And so when I work in development and I'm saying, well, what if he does this and what if she does that and what if, it's kind of a conglomeration of every movie I've ever seen, but it's original too. It's an original take on something. So I carry these, as you do too, we carry these things within us and they inform our conversations, our creativity, and it's kind of awesome.
Yep, it is. And as Katie Scarlett O'Hara would say, tomorrow is another day.
And next week is another podcast.
And do you have your Saran rant?
Here's my Saran rap. I just want to tell you all a story. Many years ago, I was working at 20th Century Fox for a producer as his development person, and I loved going to the commissary because you saw people from different TV shows that were being shot, and I saw Milton Berle once and many other actors, and the food was good. So I'm walking back to the office, and I see a man approaching me from about maybe a block away, and I can't see his face. I can't make out the face, but his body, his walk is so familiar to me. And the first thing I think of, is that my husband? No, he's home with the children. Is that my father? No, he's in Massachusetts. Is that my brother? No, he's in Maine. Who is that? Is that my cousin? But he looked so familiar. And as I got closer to him, I saw that it was Paul Newman. Now, this ties in with my theory that when we see the great ones on the screen over and over again, their physicality, like members of our family, becomes imprinted upon us. One time I saw this young man in my Trader Joe's, and for a split second I said, he looks familiar. Well, it was my son, but I saw him from the back. It was a split second of, I was, thrown off. So my Saran rap for today is the physicality of acting, that how they look, how they walk, how they move. We kind of know it if we've seen them over and over again. And also, a corollary to that is how physical acting is. My late husband, who had been an actor, he was a writer, said to me, acting is so physical. Most people don't know about that actors have to be in shape. They do take after take, even when they're sitting in a room just talking. And then they do a movie like John Wick. When I saw John Wick, I said, Keanu Reeves must have been working out all for 6 months before this film was made, because it is so demanding physically. So that's my rap. That's Saran's rap on the physicality of acting. And I hope you enjoy the next movie you see.
Thank you.
Thank you.